Welcome back to our series, Experts at Home. I am very excited today to have with me Dr. Danny Zamir, who is specialized in anxiety, and I think anxiety is such a big issue at this time that it's a really important subject for us to cover. Danny, I usually start by asking people hoping that them and their family are safe, and because I know you personally, I do know that your family is safe.
Yeah.
But I wonder about friends and people that you're seeing, if you've seen people who have been impacted by this virus.
I have. I've had a number of friends who have gotten coronavirus, um, all of whom are now recovered at this point, which I'm really pleased to see. And I actually have a couple of clients who currently have it, mostly who seem to have a fairly mild case, luckily. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many people who are impacted by this directly and indirectly. And yeah, I'm lucky that my family's being really safe and really cautious. I've definitely talked to people who are really stressed because their parents or other people who are at higher risk maybe aren't taking it as seriously, and that's causing a lot of stress for them. And so, and the other thing is, I have a lot of friends who are in the medical profession and who are working in ERs and treating people, intubating people, dealing with coronavirus day in and day out. And certainly that's been really stressful on them and in their families.
Yeah, that raises my anxiety just to hear about it.
Yeah.
I understand, and I'm so appreciative of those people who are on the front lines dealing with it.
Me too.
But it's scary to think about what they're going through. And even just the stress, even just the stress of treating people who are so ill,
Absolutely. And that's what I'm hearing, them saying is, just with the ER docs, not as much because they're used to dealing with people who are in bad way. But friends who are, even psychiatrists and doctors who don't usually see this sort of severity, who are volunteering in COVID units, to be working directly with people with COVID just because they need so many doctors.
Mm-hmm.
For them, especially, I think it's really difficult and traumatizing because they're not used to seeing people so ill. They're not used to seeing people dying, and that's a really difficult thing if you're not accustomed to. I think even if you do see that as part of your work, obviously that's challenging, but it's something you learn how to manage. And for folks, who I have a friend who's a research psychiatrist, and then she went and spent 3 months in New York City, working on COVID floors of hospitals, and I think it's just a really challenging thing. And so, being in that frontline role, whether it's nurses or other medical professionals or medical doctors, I think they're feeling a lot of the heat in terms of the stress of all this.
Yeah, my guess is that there's going to be even as this pandemic's gone, there's going to be a lot of after effects for people to deal with all of that.
Certainly,
right now, in the thick of it, and
right.
Not much time to process it, but it's kind of the aftermath and dealing with all that you're exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for family, or dealing with sick family members, or even losing family members, and how traumatic that must be at this time.
Right. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who have lost loved ones and trying to deal with that on top of all their stress and worry about themselves getting sick or other people getting sick is going to be really kind of a unique mental health problem, I think.
Yeah. I know that you see a lot of people, and I just wondered what you're seeing right now with your clients, what people are going through at this point in the pandemic.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because like you said, I specialize in working with people with severe anxiety. And so a lot of the people I was seeing obviously were really anxious beforehand. And a couple of things I've seen that have been surprising. I guess one is that for some people who have anxiety disorders, this isn't really triggering that. There's been people who I've worked with who have phobias or have social anxiety or generalized anxiety, And for some of those people, there's this feeling of like, I live in this state, and this is not actually something I'm all that concerned about. I mean, they're taking it seriously and taking precautions, but they're not, as you might expect, kind of like overly worried about this too. For a lot of people, their anxiety sometimes is kind of focused, or even with generalized anxiety, maybe there's certain sort of cluster of things that they tend to worry about, and their anxiety in relation to COVID has been, pretty average. Or for some people, there's even this feeling of like, I'm always prepared, and I've prepared even for this sort of thing. Like, I always had, 2 weeks supply of food at home, and so I wasn't rushing out to the grocery store when this all hit, and the sense of even for folks with social anxiety, for some of them, there's this feeling of like, oh, I don't have to deal with my anxiety because I can't go out and see people, and working from home is no problem. And so that's been kind of interesting seeing the flip side for some folks who always are anxious and now are feeling maybe even less so actually. And then on the other side, I've definitely had, I think there's especially certain types of anxiety disorders that are really being triggered right now in a big way. And so I've had, past patients who I've treated for things like OCD and especially contamination OCD, who, in March, when things really hit home here in terms of COVID, were reaching back out to do some kind of, to do some more work around it, because there was this feeling of like all those things that we worked for me not to do in terms of, washing my hands 50 times a day and sanitizing everything in my life. Now, I'm being directed to do that by the public health department, and like, how do I find balance in that? And so I think for that, we've had to really get specific in terms of what is reasonable, what is helpful, and what is still kind of going into OCD behaviors, and that we don't want to.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I've seen that with people with OCD as well, that it's kind of exasperated things, even though it's like something they've been training for their whole life, washing their hands frequently and all of that. Finding the balance of what's
exactly
reasonable, because it was reasonable to take precautions, but not over the line. And I've also found some people, like a couple that I've seen for a long time, the wife has a lot of anxiety. The husband has been a real risk taker, but for some reason, COVID sent his anxiety through the roof. For her, this was life is normal. You have to take care of these things. And so, I've seen some switches in that way. I also have one person I'm working with who has health anxiety, and this has really exacerbated that, on top of the fact that his stepfather died during this time suddenly, which wasn't related to COVID, but, upped his fear about having a heart attack, even though he's in his early 20s,
Right. Yeah, and I see a lot of people with health anxiety, and it's been really varied. For some people, I've seen them really fixated on it, and I think for a lot of people, there's this sense of like, oh, I have a dry throat, oh my God, do I have COVID, or I have a little bit of a headache, oh my gosh. So this sort of over monitoring of symptoms. And I've seen people where their health anxiety has really shifted to, oh, what if I get COVID? And then I've seen other people who are like, oh no, I'm still worried about cancer. I've always been worried about cancer, and even though I've never had cancer, that's what my health anxiety is focused on. And like COVID, I'm not concerned about at all. And so it's been, I think, while people, I think, on average are probably more anxious and more stressed than usual, it's been incredibly uneven in my experience, and that for some people there's the sense of like, yeah, I'll take precautions, but I'm not that worried. Or even people saying things like, I don't think I'm particularly at risk, or this sort of thing, in terms of serious, consequences, serious health effects. And they're still maybe worried about the thing they were worried about beforehand, and this hasn't really touched their anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I hear a lot from patients is this sense of like, I'm so glad I was doing therapy for months before this hit. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't started doing this work. If I didn't have these tools, I think this would have been much more difficult.
Yeah. So having some tools for coping with their anxiety was helpful in particular.
Yeah, they were able to really take that skill set and apply it directly to this new threat.
What are some of the skills that you found been the most helpful for people who are dealing with either just anxiety at this time or have always been dealing with it?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different things, and I've taken some notes here. I think one thing, and especially early on, I saw this because it felt like there was so much new information coming out all the time that people were just glued to news sites, or even their social media feed was just slammed with what I would say is a lot of kind of low quality news and low quality information about what was going on. So a lot of opinion pieces that kind of read like we're all going to die, doom and gloom. And even though this was really serious, and obviously it's escalated to a huge extent in these last months, that some of the predictions and things people were reading were overly shocking and overly disturbing. And so one of the things I've recommended to people is just to really be mindful and intentional about their news consumption, and not maybe clicking that link with the shocking headline that's on their Facebook feed, but instead, if they are going to read news, going to reliable sources, and doing it in a way that's really limited, that's managed. So they're getting information they need, but they're not flooding their nervous system with this message of everything's horrible, you're going to get sick, we're all going to die, because that really takes a big toll. And I
Yeah,
find like limiting that input of stress is something that has a huge effect. I think that's maybe the biggest thing.
yeah. I found even for myself, it's easier for me to read things because I can really stop. Whereas if
Yeah,
when people put on CNN or something like that, even though,
right,
because and partly because they're trying to keep people's attention, they see things a lot of times on a lot of mm, media that you see in a most shocking way,
right,
to keep attention. And it's really not helpful. I find that much more, and it's hard to modulate more, it's like,
right.
and so I don't find that part very helpful. I find, and,
I agree.
rely on those sources that aren't trying to scare you, but are just telling you facts that you need to know.
Right. Yeah, you can get information on what you need to do to keep yourself safe, what's going on in your area, without predictions and hypotheses and this sort of more clickbait kind of news.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't watch television news, but yeah, I hadn't even really thought about that as much. That's probably going to have a much bigger reaction, and you can't really choose which stories you read. It's just kind of coming at you.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it's a little bit easier. I can, okay, well, I trust this news source. I could read,
Yeah,
and maybe only that,
yeah. And it's easier to limit it. It's easier to say, okay, I've had enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And not having to take it in every second of the day because it's not going to change that much. So,
Right, right.
you know, you don't
Yeah,
have to be paying attention 24/7 to it. It's
right.
not.
Multiple times a day is definitely too much, is my thought.
Hmm. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Other strategies or things you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the things that help us to manage anxiety generally, and that kind of help our system to feel more balanced are helpful now too. So things like physical exercise and finding ways to do that in a way that is safe and comfortable, is really important. And so, certainly getting outside to exercise if you can do that in a safe way and maintain distance. But I've found that there's also been, sort of a huge increase in the number of resources available online that are really high quality for exercise, whether you're wanting to like do classes. Most gyms are, doing sort of, live classes that you can sign in for and still kind of participate as close to the same way you would if you were able to go to the gym as possible. And then there's obviously tons of stuff that's pre-recorded. And I think, physical exercise is just really something that helps us so much to cope with stress. And so finding a way to do that, if you can be out in nature, if you can be outside, you're going to get even more benefit from that. But just being consistent with it, finding a program and sticking to it, I think is really helpful. I'm a big proponent of mindfulness practice. And I think this is a time where either maintaining your practice or developing a new practice can be really valuable. And so setting time aside for meditation and being present, because there's such a tendency with anxiety to project forward into the future. And when we predict the future from an anxious state, we tend to predict things to be worse than they end up actually being. And so even when things are happening that are really distressing, it's not helpful to go to this sort of catastrophic expectation for the future. And so being able to come back to just what's going on in the present and dealing with that, because that's plenty right now, is just a really powerful thing for managing how stressed out we get ourselves. So
Hmm.
that's that I've really been recommending and giving people resources for consistently. I think social engagement and this, taking away from this idea of social distancing and instead focusing on this idea of physical distancing, which is that we don't want to be in close proximity to people because that's where we risk transmitting the virus. And so finding other ways to really connect on a deep level with people that we care about and being a bit creative with what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that especially early on in the lockdown, this hopping onto a Zoom call with people once a week and kind of checking in. A lot of what it would end up being is sort of like, what have you been up to? Well, not anything. I'm staying at home. What have you been up to? About the same. How's your temperature, kind of thing. And so to actually shift towards being able to share experiences together, I think is really better because that's what we do in everyday life usually, right? Is we do something together, we've got an activity, and it's easier to connect rather than just like catching up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've heard from a lot of my clients and friends kind of some creative ways of doing that from, I had a client who was doing like a cook-off with her sister
Uh-huh.
where set up a time to but they did it like this whole like cooking show style where they had a list of ingredients in their house and the other person would pick a certain number of those ingredients and then they had to make something on the fly and they would keep their computers open and be talking the whole time as they're cooking these different dishes, and it just made it really kind of fun, like something they would do if they were together and sharing a meal rather than just sort of catching up on what had been going on in their lives. And then like I'm in a book club and we've been meeting via Zoom and just having that time reading the book and then connecting with people about it and hearing different people's opinion again kind of feels like something we used to do and all meet up, but we're still able to get that intellectual stimulation and that social connection by engaging in activities like that. So I think being creative and thinking about ways to engage with people who are important to you, that are safe and aren't going to put you at risk, can be feeling that need for social connection.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think, because especially it started off with Zoom being so awkward for people as a way to connect,
Yeah,
it would be kind of that, oh, how are you? How are you? Fine,
right.
but, or we're all inside, and, now it seems like if you wait longer and have more of a conversation, you get to the people saying what's really going on in their life a little bit more, or, tell a funny story about something that actually happened and
Yeah.
that makes you think of something and, it gets more
Mhm.
connected than it was at first. I think for first it was
Yeah.
just really awkward. Like we're not used to this. Is not how
Right.
I
Right.
tend
Yeah.
to like
People are
that.
getting used to the technology.
Yeah,
Yeah, but getting beyond the surface, I think, is part of
yeah,
what you which I think is really important.
yeah.
Um,
Especially for those people who are living more alone. It's kind of nice
right.
if you have a significant other there at this time or family. Even though I know that's also driving some people crazy to be in such close quarters with uh, people that they share life with, anyways. But like every day, all day.
Hmm.
And I think like I have a patient who lives alone and he's always been had a lot of social anxiety. So first it was like great, now everybody's like me at the
Yeah.
same level. But as time's gone on and not even just having the social contact of going to get coffee in the morning and talking to the person in the coffee shop and those kinds of things. He's missing those little kinds of contact that he
Right.
did used to have in his life, or
Sure.
people at work instead of working from home or yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's been interesting for some of my clients with social anxiety because I have some folks who are like really motivated, and there's this feeling of, initially at least, of like, well, I guess I can't work on my social anxiety because I'm not, allowed to go be around people. I can't go into a group. I can't, go into these settings that usually would have been good exposure for my anxiety. And so one of the things that we've pivoted towards is, I mean, first of all, looking for opportunities still to challenge social anxiety, whether that's joining, a meditation group where it's live and in person and you're talking to people, even if that's over Zoom. Um, but also really, looking for ways to meet the people who are around you anyway. So I found that during this, I've become a lot closer to some of my neighbors who I already had positive sort of acquaintanceship with, but there's been more of kind of this feeling of like coming together And I'm, sharing things that I'm growing in my garden, and they brought me some, tangerines off their tree. Just this sort of more, just this sense of like these are the people you're right next to anyway, and this feeling more of a community, which has been really nice.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing, though, is even without, because I really, I have a pretty firm line for myself where usually I do a lot of exposure therapy where I'm encouraging people to go and face things that they're afraid of, but that aren't actually dangerous. And when it comes to COVID, I have no interest in taking a risk with somebody else's health. And so I'm not playing with that line at all in terms of, having people go and do things that would actually put them at any risk of getting the virus. But there's things that we can work on in relation to social anxiety that don't involve other people, right? Because a big piece of it has to do with our relationship with ourselves. And so one of the things that I've been having people do is really invest in that relationship, invest in their hobbies, invest in challenging self-critical thoughts that come up. And these happen, certainly they're triggered when we're in social environments, but they're things that happen all the time anyway. And so, really doing more of that cognitive work when some of the behavioral things aren't as available, I found to be really valuable as well.
I think that's such an interesting thing and so important because so much of social anxiety is about self-criticism, and
Yeah,
self.
right. I have a client who lives close to the beach and would go for walks on the beach and used to be someone who would go in the water a lot and surf and things like this. And he had a lot of self-consciousness about taking off his shirt at the beach. And this is a thing where we could challenge his social anxiety, right? Because he doesn't have to be close to someone on the beach to go down and swim in the ocean, right? But to face that self-criticism and that negative thoughts about his own body, and to be able to, take off his shirt and go swim in the water, was a real sort of thing that he could do as well behaviorally to challenge that anxiety, because it's all about what's going on internally.
Yeah, yeah, and without any, health danger.
Yeah, without
Yeah,
any exposure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, so yeah, so I mean, I think that social engagement is really important. I think certainly, resisting the urge to go to kind of like easy um, ways of cutting off feeling, like substance use, I think is really important. And so I think keeping things really moderate with substance use, drinking less than you usually would, avoiding, drugs that are going to cut you off from how you're feeling actually, but probably make things worse in the long run. Even
yeah,
caffeine, just with stress being elevated, I've been encouraging people to really, because I think sleep is going to be so important in terms of managing stress, that, you know, taking it easy, taking better care of your mind and body than you usually would. Even I've been
yeah.
really, recommending.
So important because I mean, as what studies are showing is substance abuse is going up worldwide over this alcohol consumption, for instance.
Sure.
Whether it's abuse or not. I mean, but certainly more consumption. And I think I saw that more even at the beginning of the pandemic. I think maybe when people's anxiety was higher, that people are definitely
Yeah.
drinking more
Self-medicating.
than usual. Seems like that's calmed down a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. I don't know what studies, but
Yeah.
um, because I don't think it's a great way to deal with it. And also those things interfere with sleep in a way of not just the amount of sleep, but the quality.
Quality.
And
Yeah.
we kind of need all the regenerative things we can get from sleep, from good sleep right now.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's a real good time just to be a really good custodian of your own health.
Yeah. I've certainly gotten more sleep because I'm not running around working. I'm still
Right.
working,
You
just
save on that
getting
commute.
everything. I'm definitely
Right.
sleeping more, which is good because that was my hardest self-care thing to do was to get enough sleep,
Mm-hmm.
make enough
Mm-hmm.
time.
Right. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. To really use that extra time that you're not commuting to the office or whatnot to get enough sleep, I think is a good call.
Yeah.
Um, Not having things that are going to be really stimulating in the evening, like looking at the news, reading the newest, case numbers for the world right before bed. If anything, to do that in the morning or at lunch, um, not at the end of the day when that's going to be the thing that's on your mind as you're going to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. I try to limit it, not to do it for a couple hours after I wake up or a couple hours before I'm going to go to bed. I can take
I
it
like
easy.
that.
I don't need that.
Right.
I'll,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see what else. So, and you know, I think with that, you know, practicing relaxation. So instead of going for, you know, the glass of wine or the beer, to do other things intentionally to relax, you know, throughout the day, at the end of the day. So, you know, I think things like progressive muscle relaxation, you know, like 5-7-8 breathing, I'm a big fan of. It's just even doing, you know, 2-3 minutes of it. There's this just feeling of just being physically more relaxed, and that slows down the mind. So I find myself doing those sorts of exercises with clients really frequently, because I think that developing a habit of consciously relaxing your body these days is just such a valuable thing. It's always useful, but it's particularly needed right now.
yeah, I think those are really good ideas. Yeah, I'm also a big fan of 5-7-8 breathing, and the idea of doing muscle relaxation that I hadn't thought about, but that's probably a good idea too,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
people are getting around more tension and
exactly. Right. And especially if we're, you know, sitting more than we usually are throughout the day, you know, that's something that can really just help to relax those muscles that start getting tight.
yeah, yeah. Thanks. I think that's really helpful. Um, yeah, because a lot of people I'm working with, that getting enough sleep or having a schedule that they're not, from everything being so different, it's harder. And I think it's really important to have that, to have some structure for yourself, even whatever,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. No, I do. I think that's really important. I think it's calming to have some routine, some structure, some sense of flow to your day, even if it's been disrupted. Um, and I think actually like having goals, you know, I'm not trying to, you know, make people feel like you need to be the most productive you've ever been during, you know, quarantine. Like I think that's problematic, but to have your own goals and the things that you want to work on for yourself, again, I think it does give a sense of when there's so much that's out of your control to really be able to focus in on things that you really can control, whether that's, you know, starting a new meditation program or a new workout routine, or making a point to, you know, be having conversations with friends a few times a week, to having specific measurable goals that you're tracking and following up on, can allow this sense of self-efficacy that is really helpful for managing anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you seen it change? I mean, here in California, we went into lockdown pretty early, but then we started to
Yeah,
open up and had the rise in cases. I know it's different all across the country and all across the world, kind of
sure.
where people are at in the process. But,
Yeah.
have you seen things change with the people you're working with over the course of the pandemic so far?
Yeah, that there has been a lot of change. You know, I think, and a lot more variety in terms of what people are doing. You know, I think early on, in a sense, it felt easier because there was this sense of like, well, we're being told what to do and we just got to follow along. Um, and that means really, you know, pretty seriously restricting what we're doing day to day. And then with things opening up, it sends this real confusing message of, well, okay, if the restaurants are open, does that mean they're safe? You know, and if the bars are open, does that mean it's safe to go there? And, you know, um, people having to do more of this assessment on a personal level. And I've seen a huge spectrum in terms of people's assessment of that, from this feeling of, I'm not changing anything, the numbers don't say this is a good idea, you know, to people who are like, yeah, I guess I'll just go, you know, people who are a lot less worried about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it did put it more on individuals in a way to assess their own safety at that point. And while some people were really excited to be able to go out and have a meal out in a restaurant, there's other people who felt really stressed out about that. And I think it also created a bit of a challenge interpersonally for people, because there's a lot more divergence in terms of how different people are living. And there's people who, it raises this possibility for judgment and conflict in terms of people who are like, you're crazy to be going anywhere or seeing anyone, to people who are judging the opposite way and saying, oh gosh, you're, you know, this wacko with the mask, and, you know, why are you being so germphobic or whatever? And so, it's something I've really seen is that there's, at least here, just a lot of divergence of opinion and people judging people for not acting whatever way they think is the right way to handle it. And I think that's been more stressful for some people.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's interesting to me because it's like people because uh, the rules changed or whatever, some things did open up. It did put it much more in people's court to decide,
Yeah,
and to make an assessment. And that, we're not exactly trained or equipped to make completely. I mean, we have some facts and some numbers, and you can respond to those, but people do it in very different ways. And then there's
right,
this pressure piece and the
right,
worry about friends or loved ones who are doing something very different than you're doing.
right,
You know,
right,
so I've seen some conflict within family members over somebody who's willing to take more risk and who's not. You know, even within household sometimes. Which really
right,
because whatever the most risky person does kind of exposes the other person. So that's a little bit.
right. No, yeah, that's a real challenge. And I work with college students and grad students who have roommates, and so your roommate brings someone over, that's who they're exposed to, or even if they just go out and do something, obviously you're going to be exposed to your roommate. And so uh, it leads to conflict there. And then the other place where I see this really playing out is I work with a lot of younger teens, and there's this real difference between their assessment of risk and their parents' assessment of risk. And this conflict between the feeling is like everyone else's parents are fine and they can all go hang out with their friends and have sleepovers and go to the skate park and go surf. Um, and my parents are saying I need to be cautious, or I have to only meet my friends outside, or I can't see my friends at all, And I think there's a place where um, there's so much discrepancy in terms of what parents are doing, and I don't envy their position of having to make those rules for their kids or their teenagers.
Yeah. And I think especially at that age, it's such a hard thing to want to do is be with your friends,
Right,
and
right,
what teens value is that camaraderie of friends and being parents, and especially if their friends are not rules, must be really
right,
tough. That I could
right,
really see a huge conflict. And I think with some people, you know, most of the schools closed, but
mhm,
places, some schools are open, some, it's mixed.
yeah, right, right. And here it seems like the schools are going to be online, and again, sort of for kids and teenagers figuring out what does that mean for their social lives, and is it another semester of not seeing their friends, or is it okay, or can their friends come over and do school together, and so I find people struggling to navigate this. And then this different, again, for teenagers, this feeling of like, I'll be fine, is what I hear a lot. I'm not worried about getting it. And their parents being like, yeah, well, we're worried, about you coming home and bringing it to us, or giving it to your grandparents, or whatever, the situation might be. Um, and so I find that causing conflict for families.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, it's sort of it's been kind of a little bit of a no-win situation because it's not great for kids to be out of school, but it's not necessarily good for them to be in school right now. So, you
Right.
and so I think, and rules like physical distancing are hard to enforce among friends. That's the
Yeah.
other thing I see with the use of substances like even alcohol is just that I think what happened a lot in bars and why it spread so much is because you forget about social distancing when you have a certain
Yeah.
amount of intoxication.
That's something I've seen a lot, is people telling me, yeah, I went over to a friend's house for a social distance, gathering of some sort. And then we all had a few drinks, and then that all went out the window. And by the end of the night, we were all dancing. It's like, yeah, of course, right? That's kind of to be expected, right? Part of what alcohol does is decrease our inhibitions. And so this is such a hard inhibition to keep up even when we're sober because it's so against our natural inclinations that it's going to be really difficult to keep that up if alcohol is involved or any drugs
Yeah,
for that.
absolutely. I also think it's such a weird time because, you see somebody and you worry about them coming too close all of a sudden, which is such an odd
Yeah.
thing, because, especially if you're a social person, if you don't have social anxiety. You might have been a person who welcomed saying hi to the person who was walking up.
Right.
If you're walking down the street, that was definitely my tendency before, was talk to people when I walk down the street. So I'd say hi to people. We live in a fairly friendly, uh, area here in Santa Barbara. People tend to have conversations with you.
Right.
Um, but now to sort of go like this, oh wait, is that person too close? And then have that
Right.
person too to somebody going like this, it
Right.
feels bad, or yourself, like, oh, they're
Yeah.
too close, you know.
Right.
And I've seen this even with young children who now know, oh my God, is that somebody I have to stay away from? And I don't think that's a great thing to be internalizing.
No. Right.
Either.
No, there's a deeply internalized feeling of associating other people with danger. And it's really pervasive, and it's going to be hard to unlearn, I think, for a lot of us. Absolutely. This feeling like people are hot lava, and just like I need to avoid them. And yeah, I think that's going to be really tricky. I've heard people saying, like, even when I watch shows these days, I keep thinking about how everyone's too close to each other. And I think that's a shift that over these last months our brains have really made. And yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see the long-term effects of that,
Yeah.
especially for people.
The other thing I found with the pandemic dragging on, besides the rules sort of changing so you're confused, but also that people is staying at home, is doing safe things, is very wearing on people. They're missing parts of their identity, things they used to do, people they wanted to connect with. Um, you know, um, Family members are on the other side of the country, and do I fly there? Do I take that kind of risk? Do I
Right.
not? I talked to somebody, a psychologist who had just recently moved to Texas, but her family's in Detroit. And she thought, well, I'll go back in 6 months and see them. Now she's like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
just a drug, not anything. Um,
Right.
so I've also seen people really frustrated and starting to, you know, have a little bit of magical thinking about things being safer than they are, because they just don't want to deal with, and it's hard.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's sort of underreacting or underpredicting the risk because it's inconvenient, to acknowledge. Yeah, and I've seen this with, I had 3 or 4 weddings I was supposed to go to, in these last 6 months, and you know, people rescheduling them for October, in June, because that seemed like that, this sort of optimistic thinking, and then now this feeling of like probably that's not going to be realistic at this point. Um, almost certainly, and so yeah, it's really disrupting some really important things in people's lives, from visiting family to getting married to whatever, and you know figuring out and deciding for yourself how you adjust your life to that is challenging, and it's a personal decision.
Yeah, personal decisions and challenging.
Well, you mentioned something, Lise, that I thought would be worth following up on, just about losing aspects of your identity, and not do the things that you usually would do, and something I've been thinking about a lot. And first of all, looking to like, okay, what can I not give up? What are the things I still can go do? So like I'm someone who likes to do a lot of outdoor recreation, and I stop, for example, like running on some of the more crowded trails in Santa Barbara and the Front Country, because there's more people on them than ever, and there's no way to not be really, really close to a lot of people as you go by. Um, and yet now, as we've learned more about that, outside seems to be better than inside. I never stopped. I kept running outside, but would run more on the road where it was easier to maintain distance. But now I've started doing things like going mountain biking on trails that are less populated. So being able to get back, or going rock climbing, being able to get back to doing things I really enjoy that are relatively low risk. But the
Mhm.
other thing that I think is it's a really helpful time to do is think about, like, what else would you like to be doing? What else would really be stimulating and creative that you wouldn't usually do, but that you could now, that you have maybe more time, or that other things have been, made off limits. And I think that's a really worthwhile thing, whether it's books you want to read, or there's so much there's so much available online in terms of learning languages or going through art exhibits or whatever that might look like. But even if you're staring at a computer all day for work, even things that uh, you sort of always wished you had more time for that now you can do. So
Mhm.
getting creative about being more artistic, being more involved in learning a musical instrument, things that you could pour a lot of time in that would be really pleasurable and calming, and you'd really feel good about the use of that time. I feel like to focus on what we can do rather than what we can't is really empowering, and not in a way of putting pressure on yourself, like you have to use this time productively, but instead of like this is really kind of a gift to be able to give yourself, is engaging in something that feels good, um,
Mhm.
and that usually might get sidelined because you have so many other things you want to go do.
Yeah, no, I've seen that with Ron, my husband, your father, uh,
Yeah,
that he's farming, which
yeah,
usually gets very little time to do that just
right,
because of work life. He's now dividing more, and finds that really rewarding. So
yeah. That's something I've been doing too, gardening a lot. And doing something like that where you put time into it and it feels good, and even just going out and like looking at the plants and seeing what's changed feels good, and then getting something at the end of it that you've produced and making a meal um, is such a rewarding thing. And so I think things like that are great. And I have seen people doing this, really kind of finding new hobbies, finding new things to be engaged with that have no risk ultimately.
mhm. Yeah, I found doing more cooking. That would help a
Yeah,
lot. You're not grabbing food here and there, and
right.
and that can be a creative process too.
Absolutely.
There's lots of ways people can find some things that will engage them and actually make them feel good during the time. And
Right.
again, I agree with you. It's not the pressure thing, like you have to learn a new language, during the
Right.
pandemic. I
Right.
mean, you could, if that's what you would enjoy, but it's,
Right. Right.
you know,
Yeah.
find
Right. But
something.
looking for things that bring joy and relaxation and that feel good, um, and the sense of accomplishment and achievement, it can be a really helpful part of that. But not making it a should, I think, is
Yeah,
important.
yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, and I think it's a different, I like that shift in focus for the positive. What can I do even better during this
More
time?
of, yeah. Right.
And, and the idea of looking for things you can be grateful for, like what are the gifts of this? The slowing down. And
Yeah.
I've thought a lot about this thing about, what do you want to rush back to and what do you not want to rush back to? This is over. Maybe there's
Right.
something you used to think you had to do, but maybe you don't have to do.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
you might want to leave out when you go back to it. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think for me, when I did the conversation with Dan Siegel, he was talking about this is the first time that he's forever, as I have been, saying, I'm going to travel less for work, but we never do it,
Right.
and, he's gone from going to being at the airport twice a week to go fly for him often, far away, be away for a long time. He's now home,
Mm.
and he really is enjoying that. And then I am to some extent, I miss a little bit of the travel and
Sure.
um, being new places and new experiences. But on the other hand, it's kind of nice to finally have something that kind of put a stop to it, and then I can decide what I want to pick up again. Not
Hmm. Yeah.
necessarily.
That intentionality about how you live your life, and I think while I prefer it to be in a different way, people being thrown out of their routines and their habits, there certainly is opportunity in that. There is this possibility of using, those patterns being disrupted to create new patterns, to create better patterns in terms of how we live our lives.
Hmm. Yeah. How have you found doing therapy via electronic means as opposed to doing it in person? Um,
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag. I really miss the just being in a room with someone and face to face. I think there's so much value in that in terms of connecting. Um, at the same time, I've been really pleasantly surprised that it's more effective. I would say probably equally effective, which I've been really surprised by. I think there's still tons of good work to be done. And I found that people are really engaged, and even with people I've started with over Zoom, which that was most worried about, because I think if you already have a relationship with someone, it's a little easier to maintain it, But even people I've started with over Zoom, I found that it really works well, and that it's really there's even been ways that I've been surprised, like doing things like sometimes for exposure, we'll do things like watch videos on YouTube with patients of things that trigger them in whatever way, whether it's blood draws or vomiting or whatever for phobias and things. And in my office, we sit next to each other and we got a computer and it's, whatever. Here, I can share my screen and pull up videos on YouTube that we can both watch and then process afterwards. And so there's been some interesting ways actually to use the technology that even work better sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also people who wouldn't necessarily come, for face-to-face therapy, who, I find are getting a lot out of being able to do therapy this way. And so I would say, on the whole, it's been better than I expected. Although, I still definitely look forward to the day of being able to be back in the office and meeting with people face to face. I think there's something about that that's hard to replace.
Yeah, no, that's my feeling too. But I have been really glad of how much it has worked, and also how it's allowed me to keep contact with people. It would have been really awful to just, drop
Right.
working with or something, or not be able. I mean, not have this way of connecting, and having the visual too. At least you can get some of the body language and definitely
Yeah.
expressions very intensely in a way. Um,
Yeah. The place I found it to be the hardest is with like younger teens. I don't work with young kids. I think that would probably be even more difficult. But with
yeah,
young teens, I found that they're not as engaged a lot of the time. There's some exceptions to that, but on average, I found that it's just harder when they're in a room with you. They're in a room with you, and when they're on the computer, it doesn't feel the same. They're real used to talking to people on the computer, but it's just there's not the same level of focus and engagement.
mhm.
Um, Sometimes it's meant having the parent there with them and doing more joint sessions, just to keep them more involved and interested in what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have any. I'm not working with any young, teenagers at the moment. So yeah, I can imagine it would be hard. Or children. I'm really not exactly sure how you do it.
Yeah,
Although I've talked to
yeah,
people who do and feel like they're connecting, they're partly using that thing of the idea of sharing the same activity. So with their teenagers,
yeah.
have each person in the group make a cup of coffee, and each
Mhm.
person favoring their coffee, and each person, of course, makes it their own way or whatever. But they're all doing it
Yeah.
together on Zoom.
Uh,
So, becomes a little bit of a shared feeling activity, I guess. It's just
mhm.
different than
Right.
in your office.
The two other things I just want to mention. I know we don't have a lot more time, but a couple of things. I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying. We've talked a little bit about rest and just like taking good care of yourself, but I think having a lot of compassion, recognizing this is a difficult time, and balancing planning and scheduling with a lot of time for restoration and rest. And then the other thing that I've found really powerful for people when they're able to, whether it's related to COVID or other things that are going on socially and politically right now, is that being able to take action and be part of the solution, be part of something that's making an impact, big or small, has been really beneficial for people in terms of their mental health. So whether that's medical professionals who are volunteering to work with COVID who never would have otherwise, or whether that's a college student who was sewing masks for people to donate, and making them himself. And he wasn't someone who had ever sewn, but it just felt really good to be doing something that was making a positive impact. And I find the same thing with folks who are having a lot of stress and anxiety about some of the social and political things that are really at the forefront right now, and being able to be involved with causes that they care about, and contribute and get connected. Again, I think it's just such a powerful tool psychologically for giving us a sense of it's not that I can fix what's going on, but to at least be on the right side of it and to be taking action that's meaningful for me, I think has such a powerful protective effect.
Yeah, I found that with people too. A client who's very upset about what's going on politically. And, he got involved with a texting campaign where they want you texting people and very, especially significant for this election or whatever. But,
Right.
you make a difference, and they want you to write letters. This person is a good writer, actually. You can write letters if you have the time to do it now.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Instead of just worrying about what's going to happen, being a part of making what's going to happen, in whatever way. And, we're not going to canvass and knock on doors maybe in the same way we would have.
Right.
But you can write letters, you can text people, you can, help them understand
volunteering,
how
finding a way. Yeah. Or whether that's, donating food to the food bank or going out and serving people or whatever, whatever's within your comfort zone, right? Places that are having volunteers, I find, are being incredibly cautious and taking a lot of precautions if they're having volunteers at all. I have a client who volunteers at the hospital locally, and she's in her later 60s. So for a while, they had sent all volunteers home. And then being able to be back, even on a reduced basis, I think she's there 8 hours a week now, helping people, checking people out, bringing, when there are visitors allowed, bringing visitors back to the room. And for her, this is social contact that's invaluable for her, and she's got community there. She's been volunteering there for years. And so still being able to give back to the community and be connected during that time is so beneficial for her. And the weeks where she had to stay home and couldn't do that, really hard. It was really isolating.
Yeah. And so, doing those to your degree of comfort and safety, doing the things that are going to make you feel like you're contributing. I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I do think it makes a huge difference and can give people a meaning in life, and
Absolutely.
people, I'm doing things that are important.
Yeah, and it goes from this feeling of like everything's terrible to, look, I'm part of what's making things better.
Yeah, it's a great shift.
Yeah.
That shift of attention and shift of focus that, you've talked about in a number of ways, actually, I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking this time with us, and I really appreciate it. I think it'll be valuable to people, and, maybe give people a couple of tools in their toolbox to deal with this difficult time. So thanks so much, Danny.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. Great talking with you.